world changes soon. Can get a doobie on a plane, but there's Uzis in our schools. Every dude who touched a boob or a booty getting me too. What you expect from the kids who went to Hooters after school? We're all triggered and defensive. We're all racist and we're sexist. We all grew up watching South Park. How are we offended? Now being fat is beautiful. Name a thing that you can't do. Jumping jacks, run a mile, live past 42. Man, it used to be cool to just flip a bird to the system, and now it's trendy to be triggered and pretend you're a victim. It's my race, it's my weight, it's because I'm a Christian. I hate the internet and anyone who has an opinion. And everybody angry if you say white. Okay, fine. Pass me the brush and I'll paint my
Welcome to the Red Pill Sports and Entertainment Show. I am your host, Albert Apache, and as usual, brought to you by Open Source Self-Defense, Fitness, and Grappling. Alright guys, so today or this week's episode, we're going to be talking about, first and foremost, this crazy idea that so many gym bros have that, you know, these big buff guys that hit the gym, that if you gave them a year of training, somehow they would be able to beat up UFC type fighters or even compete at a high level in jiu-jitsu or boxing. It's just time to rip the band-aid off for these guys. No, you couldn't. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about, we're going to be reacting to a video from the Weasel, the MMA Examiner. He did a video about Jon Jones and the pay negotiations that are going on with the UFC. I felt like his review kind of encapsulated how most people, the traditional kind of, I don't know what you could say, the overall view that most people are having about it right now. And so because of that, and because he made a good argument, I actually thought that to rebuke that argument, to rebuttal that argument, it would be a really good video to react to. So shout out, props to the Weasel. Check him out if you've never checked out his channel. Then we are going to talk about the UFC card in Houston. Oliveira versus Michael Chandler for the vacant lightweight belt. We're going to talk about that just a little bit, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up the show. Once again, guys, thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe, comment down below, even if you disagree, and share the video if you like it. Remember, our goal is to try to get over that 1,000 viewer subscribers so that we can go ahead and do some fun stuff going live with the channel. So let's get it started. Okay guys, so I came across this particular post the other day on Facebook, and I thought it was a little bit funny, and I went ahead and I read through some of the comments, and I thought that this needed to be addressed. So first and foremost, understand this is a red pill alert. A red pill alert. This is going to go against most contrarian thinking, okay? Especially if you happen to be a gym bro. You're probably going to get butt hurt, but hear me out. Hear me out. Take your daily red pill and hear me out. So I see this post. I think it's a bit funny. I scroll down. I'm going through the comments. I'm not going to share the comments here, but, you know, there were some people saying some really asinine things. One of the stupidest things and the most ignorant but yet most prevalent opinions below this particular post was that, yeah, but if you let the guys on the right train for 1 year, they would demolish the guys on the left. Now, this is the most ignorant thing I hear most people say. Now, this is why, okay? If you think that these guys on the right, these buff guys, the gym bros, if you think those guys are, you know, look the way they look by training 30 minutes to an hour a day in the gym, and that's all they do, right? And I'm talking about 30 minutes to an hour, like they come in, and if you were to start a stopwatch, from the time they walk in the gym door to the time they left was exactly an hour. You're on crack. There's no way they look like that, okay? Even with pharmaceutical enhancements, they don't look like that, all right? Not in that short amount of time frame, okay? These guys probably put a ton of time into their bodies, which is completely fine. Don't get me wrong. I feel like, in my personal opinion, understanding how the psychology of people attacking you work, being buff, being a gym bro, is a form of self-defense, in the sense that people look at you and they're like, man, that dude's really, really strong. I'm probably not going to pick a fight with that guy if I have a choice, because if he got a hold of me one time and I'm not a fighter and I don't know what I'm doing, he's probably going to, crush me. Or if he hits me one good time, he probably can punch pretty hard, just based on the amount of mass and the amount of strength and power he can generate, right? So they give you the puncher's chance kind of idea. Now, all that being said, this idea that these guys would train for 1 year and that they could fight at any kind of level of 2 professional fighters is ridiculous. It's utterly ridiculous. Nate, the smaller Diaz brother here, then that's the guys over on the left, if you don't know. Okay, the smaller one. He would beat both of these guys back to back, even if you gave these guys a year to train. And I don't care what discipline you're talking about. If you say that you're going to put them into a boxing match, an MMA match, or a grappling match, they could both have a year worth of training and Nate's still going to beat them back to back. See, what people don't quite understand is the amount of time, and that's not to say that you couldn't take a very gifted athlete, okay, a professional athlete in some other sport, or even an amateur athlete in some other sport that was very athletic, and that you could not train them to a level of competitiveness at a very high level in MMA or a very high level in jiu-jitsu. Okay, that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, if you think that their bodies are going to look the same way, they will not. See, there's a reason why in MMA, if you've ever watched an MMA workout, if you've ever seen a guy that's working out for MMA, let me assure you that their workouts are not sissy workouts, okay? Let me assure you this is not a fit body boot camp, 30-minute turn and burn, cardio kickboxing for 30 minutes. That is not their workout, okay? Now, you might think that you've gone into a CrossFit gym and you've done one CrossFit session and you might think that you're in shape. Hell, you might even be a CrossFitter and think you're in shape. It's a whole nother world, and it's a whole nother thing to have another human being trying to beat you up, whether we're talking about grappling rules or we're talking about striking rules. It's a whole nother world, okay? And the thing is there's a reason why these MMA fighters, as I was saying before, you can see their workouts and then you see their bodies, and there are very few, okay, Yoel Romero maybe pops into mind, okay, Jacare Souza pops to mind. There are very few MMA fighters that look like the gym bros on the right, even though they work out super intense. Okay, and we're just talking their fitness workouts. We're not even talking about their striking workouts. We're not talking about their grappling workouts. We're not talking about any of that. We're just talking about their strength and conditioning workouts. Okay, there's a reason why very few of them look like the gym bros. And the reason why they do not look like the gym bros is because the type of training that you do for combat sports, because part of the combat sport is also being prepared to go 25 minutes, 30 minutes of fighting against a resisting opponent. Okay? Because of that, most people's bodies will not put on that type of mass. because your body's going to adapt to be able to do what it needs to do. So first and foremost, the idea that these guys would be as strong, raw power, raw strength, let's say raw strength, because strength and power are two different things. But let's say raw strength. If you think that they are going to keep their raw strength, putting in the amount of time they would have to put in order to even be competitive with a pro fighter in 1 year, you're crazy. There's no way they're going to keep that raw strength. There's no way they can maintain it. There's not enough time in the day. Okay? Now, let me explain this for you gym bros out there that are already getting butthurt about this. Okay? That's like me saying that I could take these triathletes on the left, these professional MMA fighters, and I could make them an Olympic level power lifter in 1 year. That I could make them a world class, or not that I personally, but I could find somebody that could coach them, and it would only take a year of training, and they could be a world class power lifter. They could be a world class bodybuilder. I don't understand this disrespect, and really what it comes back to, in my personal opinion, is the insecurity of gym bros. Like, nobody's disrespecting you just because we point out the fact that, like, your muscles are great, bro, but at some point in time, if you really had to fight with some guys, like, your skills gonna be come into play at some point in time. Now, yeah, against guys who are maybe a little bit smaller than you, you're not gonna have too much problems. But guys who are roughly your size, okay, roughly your weight, you're gonna have a hard time with. And that's just reality. And you don't believe me. If you do not believe me, all I want you to do is go to the closest wrestling school. Wrestling. Okay? Wrestling. I'm not even saying BJJ. Wrestling. There's not even any submissions. It's pretty straightforward. Don't let them get you on the ground, and don't let them get you on your back. So there's really, those are the two major things. And go against somebody who is like, maybe if you're a gym bro and let's say you weigh 200 pounds or you're close to 200 pounds, go with somebody who's 175. I will tell you what, trying to lift something, I don't care how much you bench press, I don't care how much you squat, I don't care how much you deadlift, I guarantee trying to lift another human being that is not only 175 pounds, but has the ability to exert force against you is way harder than your deadlift. It's a different chain of muscles. It's a different way of lifting. It's a different type of fitness. And if you're not used to using those muscles in a coordinated way to do the things that you need to do in a combat sport, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. And again, for you gym bros, so that you understand, that's like trying to compare a clean and jerk, right, to a leg press and saying, well, they're gonna I can stack the leg press, so that means I should be able to clean and press this many pounds, because, well, I should be able to do 700 pounds of clean and press because it's almost the same thing. Really? Seriously? Well, I should be able to front squat 700 pounds because I can stack the leg press. Do you understand how moronic that sounds? Do you understand how nonsensical that sounds? How you're trying to compare apples to oranges? Well, that's exactly the same thing you're doing when you try to say that you can take these guys who are gym bros and make them as good as professional fighters in a single year. And in your mind's eye, you think, I know what you're thinking. I know what these guys are thinking. They're thinking that these guys are going to be as big and as strong in 1 year of that training. And the reality is, because they will be doing a different type of training, they will not be. They will not look the same. They will not be the same weight. They will not, all that stuff will not be the same. So, keep that in mind, guys. And then the last argument I've heard that is ridiculous sometimes is these people who really buy into the idea that weight classes are there because, weight really, really matters. Now, does weight matter? Absolutely, weight matters to a certain extent. But the real reason why there's weight classes, okay, is money. That's the real reason why there's weight classes. Weight classes allow MMA to be sanctioned by the athletic commissions, making it legal in the 50 states, or I think it wasn't legal in New York for a while. I don't know if there's another state, but the majority of states. That's what weight classes did for the UFC. Weight classes came into the UFC specifically and solely for the purpose of, let's make this more athletic commission friendly so that we could market to the masses. Okay? You can't really tell me there's a huge difference between a 125 pounder and a 145 pounder. If you see these two guys on the street walking next to each other, there's probably not that big a difference in weight. Same with probably about 145 to 170. Those guys are pretty close. You could probably really group all of those guys into one weight class. Okay? So yes, weight matters, but not to the extent that you think it does. And particularly, weight starts to become negated the bigger the skill gap. Okay? The bigger the skill gap, the more weight gets negated. And that's just facts, guys. That's just facts. So that's what I got. A bit of a red pill for our training purposes today, for our touching on jiu-jitsu training. And again, this is why you need to find an academy, and you need to start training jiu-jitsu, and you need to get your sons into jiu-jitsu. All right, guys, that's what I got on this topic. Let's go ahead and move on.
I don't see why it wouldn't be a $50 million fight, and the UFC still makes. I don't see why it wouldn't be a $50 million fight, and the UFC still makes bank.
Okay, guys, so you may or may not have heard of Weasel, MMA Examiner, but he does a fantastic show. He does some very amazing technical breakdown videos. If you've never checked out his channel and you like MMA, even if you were a casual, I really think you get a lot out of your enjoyment of the fights by watching his breakdowns and really understanding what's going on technically inside a fight. Now, on top of that, the Weasel also will come out from time to time and talk about different issues within MMA besides just the technical aspect. And of course, he did talk a bit about this whole Jon Jones $50 million. And we're going to go ahead and take a listen and honestly kind of do a reaction, a review. I think he's a tiny bit off base here with some of his analysis of the situation, and we're going to talk about that. So shout out to Weasel. If you, like I said, if you've never heard of him, you might want to go take a look at him. And let me be completely clear, I don't know the guy. We're in no way in a partnership or anything like that. I just thought that his breakdown seems to be of the pay issue, seems to be what conventional wisdom is, and I really wanted to address that and kind of do a back and forth. So let's go ahead and take a listen to what the Weasel had to say.
What's up, guys? Business Weasel here. So we know that Francis Ngannou versus Jon Jones is a fight that both Ngannou and Jones both want, and the UFC does want to put together. But the price has to be right, specifically for Jon Jones, in order to take it. Has he overpriced himself?
Okay, guys, let me go ahead and jump in here. First off, we can see the direction this is going to go just by how the Weasel has already framed the question. Notice the question puts the onus on Jon Jones. It's a fight that both guys want to make, but the price has to be right, particularly for Jon Jones. This could have been reframed to both these guys want the fight, the UFC wants to put on the fight, but the UFC needs to make the most amount of profit possible. Is the UFC trying to lowball Jon Jones? See, that's a different way to frame that question, rather than asking whether or not Jon Jones is pricing himself out of the fight. So, just things to keep in mind as we continue on and we listen to the Weasel. I appreciate the fact that at the very least he is acknowledging that Jon Jones does want the fight. That being said, you can already kind of see the mentality, the approach that we're going to go down for this particular video. All right, let's see what else the Weasel has to say.
So Jones was talking with the UFC, and he said around $8 to $10 million is too low for him to fight Francis Ngannou. What does around mean? Does that estimate to $15 million? How far does that go?
Now, absolute props to the Weasel here. He's the only one that's commented on this particular tweet and been intellectually honest. We don't know what 9 to 10 million, around 9 to 10 million means. We don't know if that rounds up to 12, 15. We don't know where that ends. And I think that the Weasel's been the only person that I've seen do videos that's been intellectually honest about this. Even those that seem to be siding with the UFC and kind of seeing the UFC's point of view and not so much Jon's point of view here. That being said, props to the Weasel for at least pointing this out. Let's continue on and see what other takes the Weasel has.
Jones is probably asking for a little bit too much money compared to what his pay-per-views are generating. $10 million is a bit too low for Jon Jones in general, for his skills involved, the amount he has accomplished in the sport. He's been a champion for so long, he has big fights in the past. He outsells boxers who make more money than him, specifically Deontay Wilder, right? Deontay Wilder does not sell the same amount as Jon Jones. The only fight that really did was this Tyson Fury rematch. That was mainly because he was fighting Tyson Fury, and Tyson Fury is bigger internationally. In North America, it did 800,000 pay-per-view buys, which is roughly the same amount as what Jon Jones will make in various specific fights, yet he still makes much less than Deontay Wilder. So I see the argument, man. Jon Jones definitely is worth more than $10 million.
And herein is why I believe that, the Weasel got it wrong in the way that he framed the question to start his entire video. Because it seems that, the Weasel is in agreement with my stance, which is that Jon Jones' pay is way too low. His last guaranteed, I believe, was $500,000 was his last fight against Diaz. That's way too low for Jon Jones. And now as we look towards the future, you're telling me that you're going to offer 9 to 10 million. That is way too low for Jon Jones at this point. So really the framing of this entire question, where everybody needs to start focusing, is the UFC going to be true to its brand, the way it built its brand, which is, we give you the fights you want. We give you the fights that the fans actually want to see. And are they trying to lowball the fighters? But let's see what else the Weasel has to say on Jon Jones overpricing himself.
Factor in, it does seem like Jon Jones, given that what his coach has been saying, it does seem like that Jon Jones is overpricing himself. But when you look at the pieces that make up that number for someone like Deontay Wilder, right? Wilder makes a bunch of money because he was a free agent. There's different promoters in boxing. When there's different promoters, there's more competition when it comes to the price tag. On the dark side, you don't get the fights you want to see often. But then on the bright side, the top guys in the game get paid a lot of money. And Jon Jones would be one of the top guys in the game. In the UFC, there's going to be other fighters who are going to take that opportunity because they're all under one banner. There's not this competition for a price.
So props to the Weasel. He actually brings up the whole fact of the promotion thing. Now, again, this goes back to me. I really feel like the question here, the framing of the question should be, is the UFC trying to lowball Jon Jones. Now, I got news for you, for those of you who are not Jon Jones fans, and you would love nothing better than to see Ngannou knock him out. You do realize that if they're lowballing Jon Jones, they are also lowballing Ngannou. Now, you know, the problem is, and the Weasel alludes to it here, is that essentially the UFC is not a promoter. I know it's called a promotion. I know that's technically what it is, but in all reality, the UFC is a league, and in which each individual fighter is almost like his own franchise. It's almost like you can compare the UFC to the NFL. It's not really the league's responsibility to promote the popularity of each individual franchise as much as it is for the league to promote the popularity and the income streams of the entire league. And this is why I think that the way that the Weasel comes in to this particular conversation is a bit misguided, or shall I say, has been distracted. The real question here is the UFC going to be true to the fans? Now, we've seen the UFC in recent times kind of go away from what it built its reputation on, which again was giving the fans the fights that they wanted to see, matching up the best fighters based on merit. They kind of went away from that, started doing these super fight type things. Okay. The question is the UFC going to give the fans what they want and stop lowballing these better, more attractive fights and fighters?
Conor McGregor made $50 million fighting Khabib, and that card sold 2.4 million buys. The biggest pay-per-view in UFC history, with Conor making the same amount of money that Jon Jones is allegedly demanding for to fight Francis Ngannou. So if we crunch the numbers and scale it to Conor's pay, 2.4 million gets you roughly $50 million. And we'll say that Jon Jones makes the same margin as Conor, which he probably won't.
So props to the Weasel again for at least being honest that essentially what we're seeing, and that Jon Jones' gripe is 100% legitimate, and that is that he will not see or have his contract structured in such a way that he'll see the same margin as Conor McGregor. And again, it leads us back to the question to why. Why are, two athletes, two fighters of similar caliber, of similar stature, not getting the same type of contracts? And in all reality, Jon Jones is higher up on the greatness list of MMA than Conor McGregor. As much of a Conor McGregor fan as I am, I can be honest and I can say that. And it all goes back to the fact that the UFC has a monopoly on its fighters. Go back to the NFL analogy here. We have the NFL. What if the NFL owned every single franchise? Do you think we would have these Dak Prescott-like holdouts? Would we have these super mega money deal contracts for quarterbacks? Absolutely not. That would not happen, because the NFL would have a monopoly on the quarterback talent pool. Okay? So you really have to ask yourself, why exactly is the UFC lowballing Jon Jones here? Now, I know that he's about to talk about how many pay-per-views and stuff like that. I really think that both the Weasel and the UFC are downplaying the amount of pay-per-views that this fight will sell. But let's listen up.
Conor probably takes a percentage out that other fighters don't, besides with the exception of maybe Khabib. Khabib and Conor probably take out the same margin out of every pay-per-view they have. So 2.4 million gets you $50 million. What will Jon Jones versus Francis Ngannou do in the pay-per-view? Probably 800,000, right? Around there. I'll say around 800,000 buys. That is exactly a third of what Conor sold against Khabib. With that, you should cut Conor's pay by a third, and that will give you roughly $17 million. So if we scale to Conor McGregor, Jon Jones should be getting about $17 million at the end of the day after pay-per-view. That's if Jon Jones gets the same margin and the same base pay of $3 million from the fight.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the fact that the Weasel went ahead and pointed out the fact that the base pay is $3 million there at the end of that clip. And he says, if Jon Jones were to have the same base pay of $3 million and the same margin, then this is what he should make, the $17 million. If you say that he continues to sell at that 700 to 800,000 pay-per-view buys. Now, I don't think anybody has issue with that is a Jon Jones supporter, that anybody who's taking the Jon Jones side of this negotiation. And shall I say, it's not just the Jon Jones side, it's the fighters side, plural, as in the stable of fighters in the UFC. There's a huge discrepancy there with base pay as well. $3 million Conor McGregor versus what did the last, these last two heavyweights get for this championship fight? I want to say they both got right around 500,000 to 800,000. I mean, you're talking somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 6 times more base pay for Conor McGregor than what the entire purse was for the two heavyweights that just fought out for the championship. Given the amount of risk, the amount of damage that can be taken by a heavyweight, that seems ridiculous. I mean, it just seems utterly ridiculous. Jon Jones is not asking for anything more. In my opinion, what I hear Jon Jones asking for is like, hey, no, we're going to structure this contract in a way that if we get those 3.2 million pay-per-view buys, I'm getting my 50 mil, right? That's what I hear. Now, I know some people think he wants guaranteed money. I don't think that's going to happen because there's really no such thing as guaranteed money in the UFC, okay? But that's what I think Jon Jones is asking for. You continue on and you start to think about exactly what's going on with the UFC. And here is my main problem with the UFC right now, and the Weasel kind of fell for the bait in my opinion here, is that right now there's this big discrepancy, right? 800,000 pay-per-views to 3.2 million pay-per-views. Now that seems ridiculous, but you're comparing apples to oranges. Remember that the Khabib-Conor fight was promoted essentially for nearly 2 years, going all the way back to the Artem Lobov confrontation with Khabib, right? Khabib coming up and talking to him, all the way through the bus incident, all the way up until the fight. So you got nearly 2 years of promotion for that fight, okay? And this is where I feel like the UFC continuously gets off the hook. They find a way to change the narrative, and you got to give it to Dana for being a brilliant marketer. But he finds a way to change the narrative and get the UFC off the hook because the UFC says it's a promotion. If it's a promotion, why does it not own the responsibility of promoting its fighters? It really should own the responsibility of promoting its fighters. Too many times the UFC essentially pawns off the responsibility of marketing fighters and promoting fighters to the fighters and their agents themselves. And, it's a travesty because I really feel that if the UFC really wanted to make this fight happen and really wanted those $3.2 million or 3.2 million pay-per-view buys, I think they could make it happen because this is an intriguing fight. So I still cannot for the life of me understand why the UFC is dilly-dallying and twiddling its thumbs and essentially lowballing Jon Jones. But let's listen to what the rest of the Weasel's comments here.
So what would you do? Pay Jon Jones $20 million, $50 million for 800,000 buy card? Or go to Derek Lewis or Ciryl Gane, who will get $500,000 and it'll sell like 500,000 buys. You're going to make more profit with the Derek Lewis Ciryl Gane option than you will if you go to the Jon Jones one.
So 2 things here. He asks, what would you do? And then he also talks about the pay-per-view buy numbers. So number 1, what would I do? Well, it's a bit we have to look at the second question or the second thing first. The 800,000 pay-per-view buys. paying $50 million for that. I think that's a bit disingenuous, or a bit of a straw man, if you will, that the Weasel is setting up. I don't think anybody's suggesting, I don't think that Jon Jones is suggesting that if he just sells 800,000 pay-per-views, that he should still be making $50 million. I think what Jon Jones's team is suggesting, and Jon Jones is suggesting, is that he should be paid on the same scale as Conor McGregor, i.e. the same type of base pay and the same type of margin. Now, with that being said, let's reframe that question. The question really should be, so what do you do? Do you pay Jon Jones on the same scale as Conor McGregor? Or do you go get a lesser fighter for Ngannou? Well, I guess that depends on what you're trying to do as the UFC. If you're trying to build legacy and you're really trying to get back into these big stadiums now that, you know, a lot of these states are lifting their lockdowns and it will be allowed, and you want to fill a stadium, I think you pay Jon Jones. I pay, if it's me, if I'm in charge, I pay Jon Jones on the scale of Conor McGregor.
You have to factor in all the expenses and the cost of putting the card together. So when you really do think about it, it is pretty crazy for Jones. If he is asking for $50 million or anything more than $20 million, it does seem like he's overpricing himself.
So 3 major points here. Number 1 has to do with the UFC and how its responsibility or its costs always seem to become the fighter's responsibilities, or, you know, something that the fighter needs to take into consideration. Next, you also have the fact that, again, still with this narrative of being overpriced on a 800,000 pay-per-view buy scale. Okay, I think that that's just a misnomer. And then lastly, again, when you start talking about price and what it's really going to cost the UFC, why are we not taking into consideration the invaluable, the priceless building of your brand that it's going to do by putting on the fights that the fight fans want to see? Here's the reality. The UFC needs to put on fights that both excite the base so that you get a lot of the diehards and excites the casuals. Okay, you're gonna have a hard time now selling fights because of the double paywall, the ESPN Plus deal, but that's a whole nother animal. We're not going to talk about that right now. But because that is a bit of a hurdle, you have to keep that in mind. And essentially, you need fights that both casuals and diehard fans are willing to shell out money for. You have to build goodwill with the diehard fans. Okay, you have to. They're not going to purchase these. They will go very swashbuckly on you if you do not put on fights that are worth, you know, paying a premium to watch. So that's number 1. And then we go back to the original thing that I said before. You know, somehow, you know, Uncle Dana has okey-doked the Weasel here, and he has the Weasel towing the company line. Oh, you don't understand the costs putting on. You got to remember the costs of putting. Why is that always a concern for the fighter and the public? Yet nobody ever seems to be concerned that the fighter has costs as well. He has, you know, physical therapy costs. He has physical training costs. He has coaching costs. He has housing costs. He has food costs. He has travel costs. Okay, he has costs as well, yet nobody ever seems to be focused on that. And that is a credit to Uncle Dana, because Uncle Dana has done a spectacular job of always bringing to the forefront how much it costs them. Now, all that being said, given that the UFC never really shut down the way the other sports did, and in fact actually grew its viewership, you can't tell me that putting on those smaller events in the Apex Center where you have very limited amount of people, there's no way that those were as expensive or more expensive than putting on an event where you have, you know, hundreds of thousands of fans in the seats. there's no way that the costs involved in those have been more. So it's funny that that becomes a concern, yet fighters didn't necessarily see additional pay in their paycheck. But now it's a concern when we want to talk about keeping pay out of a fighter's paycheck.
So because of all this, there's going to be a lot of fans who are going to say that Jon Jones is afraid of Francis Ngannou. He's asking for crazy amount of pay that he would never ask for any other fight. Even Daniel Cormier, a former fighter, one of the greatest of all time, a guy who knows the business part of the game, he even admits that Jon Jones would not ask for this kind of pay if he was going to fight Stipe Miocic. The risk for fighting Francis is what is driving Jones to up the pay, but this up in pay seems a bit more drastic than anything we've ever seen before.
And here the Weasel closes with the drastic ask in pay. Again, I don't think that the pay ask is too drastic by Jon Jones if we're saying that Jon Jones is asking to be paid on the same scale as Conor McGregor. What I do see is that the actual amount that the UFC is getting away with not paying its heavyweight champions, not paying the heavier weight classes, when there is clearly more danger and more risk to your body. The longevity of careers is generally much shorter in the heavier weight classes. It seems ridiculous. It just seems utterly ridiculous. You know, I feel like what we have here is a case in which Jon Jones has sat back. He has watched plenty of fighters make their name off of him, off of calling him out, off of comparing themselves to him. Now, I know you have the PED usage, which will always be over Jon Jones' head. That being said, Jon Jones is the GOAT. I've done a video about this before. Jon Jones is the GOAT. Khabib is not even close. Khabib is not even close to Jon Jones. If you want to point to one loss on disqualification, which was ridiculous, it was a ridiculous disqualification. You know, it was horrible. The guy was still getting beat up. Matt Hamill was getting smashed. Okay, we all know Matt Hamill did not beat Jon Jones. All right. Now, all that being said, Jon Jones has been doing it against tougher talent much longer than Khabib. I know a lot of people think, well, Khabib, look at that record, 29-0, blah, blah, blah. You really got to go back and take a look at that record. Number 1 through like 15, maybe 1 through probably 20, you got to really take a close look at who he was fighting. Go do your research and look into some of the guys he was fighting. If Jon Jones had 1 through 20 fights against guys of that same caliber, Jon Jones would also hold a 29-0 record. All right. So the reality is that Jon Jones has seen all these fighters make their name off of him by comparing themselves to him, by fake calling him out, i.e. Israel Adesanya, i.e. Jan Blachowicz. Okay. These guys are fake calling out Jon Jones. They know Jon Jones is not in the light heavyweight division anymore. Okay. They know that he is trying to step up and get paid cash money. The reality is if this was a money fight for the heavyweights, now if you're talking $50 million on the scale of $50 million, if the UFC can find a way to get to that $3.2 million pay-per-view buys, that would mean that the $50 million would be easily doable for Jon Jones. That means you're going to start attracting that upper echelon of boxer to come on over and try it out. Hey, I can get a $50 million payday. Imagine if Tyson Fury decided to fight MMA. Imagine if Deontay Wilder said, hey, I think I can knock out Ngannou, and he stepped into the octagon. because he felt like, hey, if I can learn how to check some kicks, I'll be able to land this, land this bronze bomber right hand and it'll all be over. It could happen, guys. But the key is that these heavyweights have to start getting paid. Okay? The heavyweights need to start getting paid. All right, man. That's what I got. Let's go ahead and move on to the next topic. Okay, guys, let's go ahead and get into it. So, UFC 262 coming up for the vacant 155 championship, Oliveira versus Chandler. And on the undercard, we got Edwards versus Diaz, as you may have heard. So really quick, preliminarily, let me talk about the undercard first. Edwards versus Diaz. I really feel like this is a very bad matchup for Diaz and his style that he likes to fight. I think it really plays into Edwards. Edwards' type of style. Edwards is, I guess you could call him the king of the decisions. I'm not saying that he's a bad fighter. I think he's actually a very good fighter. That being said, he does go to quite a few decisions. He's a very good fighter, tactician, wise, and he does set up, his opponent to take damage while he stays out of the way of damage. Just given the last performance of Diaz, I just really feel like this is a bad matchup for Nate. I would not be surprised if we saw a relatively boring fight in which Edwards just eked out every single round against Diaz and walked away with like a 4-5 decision. Oliveira versus Chandler. This is an interesting fight to me because I could see both fighters winning here. I could see a way in which both fighters could create matchup problems for the other. And, I'm going to have to dive a little bit deeper. I really want to go with Oliveira here because, I really respect all the work he's done, all that time. Not to say that Chandler hasn't put in a lot of time as well, just not in the UFC. But Chandler would be a fun champion to have. So I'm leaning towards Oliveira right now, but I'll get into taking a look at some tape and seeing what could play out. Now, to me, the bigger part of this story is the Corona Bros must be completely livid. If you didn't know, this card will be fought in front of a live audience, and it sold out in minutes. 17,000 fans in Houston. This is crazy. This is crazy. What is this saying to us? This is saying to us that people are tired of the Corona Bros trying to tell us that we cannot go to games, that we have to double, triple mask and bag and face shield and, social distance and, do butthole tests, you name it. Okay. This is what it's saying to the Corona Bros. Now, if I could just get the rest of you all that I know don't go along with it. Look, if I see you in a restaurant, bro, and you wear your mask from the door to sit down and you take it off and you leave it off the entire time and then you get up and you leave and you never put your mask back on, I know you're on the side of common sense with me. I really need you to just refuse to wear your mask, particularly in the states that do not have mask mandates. For instance, I can speak right now for the Arizona area, for the Valley area. It's funny to me that people are still wearing masks even though they don't believe in it, and it just goes to show the way that people get conditioned into a certain type of behavior. I see plenty of people who match the description I just said. They clearly don't believe a mask is doing anything or helping them or whatever. They're not afraid. But to pacify all the weenie babies, they go ahead, and all the Corona Bros, they go ahead and wear their mask in that superficial way. Many of them wearing their mask below their nose, some of them even on their chin below their mouth. And it's just utterly ridiculous. Look, have a set, and just take your mask off. Look, if you don't believe it works, you don't believe it works. Just don't wear it. Don't do the half-hearted BS. Now, if you think you need to wear a mask and you think it's protecting you, well, then hold to that. And be like the guy that I saw the other day who walked into the restaurant. He had his mask on the entire time. He got his food. He walked out. He wore his mask all the way into his car. He got into his car. He did not take his mask off, and he proceeded to drive away. I can only assume he wore his mask all the way home and wore it inside the house. Like, I can only assume. If you're going to use a mask, that's how you should be using a mask. Stop with the political theater. But I think this is absolutely awesome that the first UFC card back in front of a live audience has sold out in Houston. It's super exciting, and that's all I got, guys. Okay, guys, well, that is the show. Thank you so much for joining me. Remember, we're trying to get to them 1,000 subscribers, so please like, subscribe, share the video, comment down below. Do some fun stuff going live, things of that nature. Also, just want to bring to your attention, guys, been doing some research, realizing that it might be better to do shorter form videos to help grow that viewership and the subscriptions. So probably going to go to shorter format, probably one topic and in and out. So that's what we got, guys. All right, well, again, thank you for listening. Remember, be practical, be purposeful, get fit with a purpose, guys.